عوافي يا جماعة and welcome to another episode of اتمشى مع إبراهيم. كيفكن يا جماعة اليوم؟ بعرف ما حدا منكم في يرد علي بس إنه سؤاله بينسأل. I hope everyone is doing okay. And as you guys know, at the start of every episode we start off with نكتة اليوم or the joke of the day. So نكتة اليوم كمان الهدف إنها تكون بايخة وبعتقد إنها بايخة. شو صار لما شربت الدجاجة مي سخنة؟ بيضة مسلوقة. So بايخة. I think 9 out of 10 تربح معنا. One of my favorite jokes. بيضة مسلوقة. Okay, so today's episode, before I delve into today's episode, I'd like to point out something is that in Australia نحنا من I think Sunday صار daylight saving. So قدموا الساعة ومع هيك صارت الدنيا عم بتعتم بكير. So أنا هلا عم بتمشى and عم بتبلش تعتم الدنيا. So I think what might happen is that there might be a shift and that تمشى مع Brian would instead have to be published on Saturdays rather than on Wednesday like it is today, to be able to give myself enough time to prepare and go for the walk and actually talk about this. لأنه إذا ما هيك حتصير القصة شوي معوصة. But we will see. And so we move on to today's topic. So today's topic is the difference between Melbourne and Sydney. So last week I got to head over to Melbourne for 4 days, and it was quite a nice trip. Saw a lot of friends, a lot of family, and got to experience Melbourne City for the third time. Now, one of the things that people constantly keep telling me about Melbourne and what's the problem with Melbourne is the weather. انه الطقس هونيك بيقلب بسرعة ما بتعرف إذا شتي ولا صحو. بس I can't make that call because all 3 times that I've been to Melbourne the weather has been amazing. So I don't know how to testify in terms of like, oh yeah, the weather is shit, because the reality of it is I've experienced good weather there, so we'll put that point aside. But on a different level, there's so many things that distinguish Melbourne from Sydney. Firstly, if you go to the city of Melbourne, the streets there, because it was planned out, so Sydney started off as a colony on the water and then expanded. So that's why the city streets are quite narrow compared to what they are in Melbourne. And I think that does affect a lot of things. So when you're walking through the city over there, you feel like you can breathe easier. You can see a lot more of the sky, a lot more of the sun as well, rather than when you're in the middle of the Sydney city. So many tall buildings and high towers, and they're so close together that you don't get that kind of feeling of openness. وهذا الشعور اللي انت بس تكون ماشي في شارع وتحس حالك هيك شوي انه فيك تاخد نفس. بعد طرقات ملبورن على فرق سيدني، وهيدي just from a kind of roads urban planning point of view, I feel like Melbourne has the advantage because it makes it seem so much easier and so much cleaner to walk through the city itself. But I think one of the main things that I've noticed about Melbourne, now there's a couple of things that we're going to talk about, but one of the main things that I've talked about, I'm going to talk about right now, is the fact that I've worked in Sydney City, in the CBD, for the past 5 years, okay? And once you get into the work rhythm here and the working life here, you notice how, or you start to realize the expression, which is said a lot here, that it's kind of like a rat race where كل الوقت بتحس حالك عم تركض ركض 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 ركض، بتوصل من الترين، بتمشي على الشغل، بتخلص الشغل، بتاكل بسرعة، بتخلص من الشغل بسرعة، بتركض على الترين، تطلع بالترين، بترجع على البيت. يعني you won't feel it until you experience it, but there is this kind of very fast-paced rhythm in Sydney City where you feel like everyone's on edge, everyone's trying to finish off what they have to do and get it done as quick as possible, head out. Meanwhile, in Melbourne City, and again, this is my impression as a visitor to Melbourne, so I haven't worked there to tell you what it's like there, but I just had a feeling that it's just that time moves kind of slower. Not that it technically moves slower, but you feel like it moves slower. No one's rushing, no one's, or that, again, that's what I saw. No one's rushing, no one's running, it's just the pace of your day-to-day is way slower. And one of the things that I did there that kind of showed me that was on one of the days that I was off, it was in the middle of the week. So I got out of my hotel quite early and went for a walk in the city because I wanted to see what it was like when people were going to work, when the city was waking up. And it didn't give off the same impression as Sydney. It didn't give off this hustle and bustle where everyone's just like in a rush to get to kind of figure out what they need to do and to get on and to do it. So I feel like on that, or from that standpoint, Melbourne wins for me because it just slows down the pace of your day and allows you to kind of get a breath of fresh air, and that's depending on the person. But for me myself أنا بعتبر هيدا الشيء كتير مهم، إنه هيك إنه ما أكون أنا مستعجل كل النهار وعم بركض ويلا بدي أخلص بس إنه فيني like هيك أخذ pause شوي، امشي على مهلة بدل ما امشي بسرعة. But this is a point that I noticed. Now a lot of people might not share this point, or having worked there would notice that that point is not true. But it's something that I think is worthwhile, or something that I have noticed. And I did mention to a couple of friends who do kind of agree on that point, that it is quite slower. But also one of the things that I did, which I recommend to everyone when you're traveling, I know a lot of people when you travel, you like to see the nightlife and you like to see how the city is, but my favorite experience of traveling is getting to see how a city wakes up. So I tend to, wherever I go, get up really early, go for a walk, just walk around, grab a coffee, and see how the city wakes up. And Melbourne is quite nice. So a lot of active people. Sydney has a lot of active people as well. But one of the things that helps with Melbourne is that there's the river that passes right through the city, and that also adds to that breathing aspect of the city itself first, but also it gives off that kind of recreational exercise space. So you see all the people running around across the river, and alongside the river, and they make groups of like 4 or 5 running together to start off their day before they head off to work or wherever it is that they're going to next. And I think that's also an interesting thing about Melbourne. So Sydney has the harbour, so it has Darling Harbour, it has Circular Quay, which is next to the Opera House, which are beautiful vistas straight at the water. You get to see the bridge, you get to see all the ships coming through, and it's amazing. But having the river is different because it basically cuts through the city. And so when you get to the point where there's a crossing over the river, if you cross that crossing and you're standing in the middle, you get to see kind of like a cross section of the city. So you get to see, you're kind of standing from a distance from both sides of the city, on each bank of the river. Meanwhile, in Sydney, if you want to experience that, you get on a ferry, and then from the water you get to see kind of the scale of the city. But with that river in the middle, kind of provides that perspective, which is also quite nice. Um, and yeah, it improves your impression of the city. Now, I'm not saying, again, this is me going like, this is what I noticed in Melbourne, and this is what I've noticed in Sydney. And I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying that there's some things that are here that are not there. For example, the advantage of Sydney City is that the fact that it's Sydney. Sydney is, even though it's not the capital of Australia, I think it's the most important, or maybe you can say the financial capital of Australia. So all the big business happens here, all the big jobs are happening here, uh, all the advancements in terms of like progressing are happening in Sydney, and especially in the field of architecture as well. So when it comes to professional career, or when it comes to career progression, I would definitely always recommend Sydney, because that's where you're gonna see the trailblazers. That's where you're gonna see the people that are generally pushing themselves to become better, and that's where it's the competitive market, especially in architecture. Um, so there's an advantage to both. And also, speaking of architecture, one of the things that I've noticed as a difference between Melbourne and Sydney is that in Sydney, um, architecture is very, very rigid, and the rules are very rigorous. So you've got a set of rules that you need to comply by, and they almost dictate every single thing. So the design intent of a project is pretty much washed away by the amount of rules and regulations that are there. Meanwhile, in Melbourne City, you see that they have, the best way I can explain this is that they have more freedom for artistic expression. So you drive around the city, or you're walking around, or public transport, whatever it is, and you notice that in Melbourne, you might not like it. You might not like the design of the building. You might think it's ugly. Regardless, that's not what I'm arguing. What I'm arguing is that these architects are given the opportunity to be way more free in terms of their design, and way more experimental. So the fact that they're given this platform to be able to design exceptional buildings. Meanwhile, here in Sydney, you're very rarely are you given that chance to be able to do something like this, unless you're some big architectural office, or like a star architect who comes in to do this, like Jean Nouvel in his building across UTS. So you see that kind of freedom to express, freedom of artistic expression, does not only apply to architecture, it applies to the general public. Like, generally walking through Melbourne City, sorry, you feel like it embraces the arts a lot more than Sydney. You get a lot of random art stores that are everywhere, displaying paintings and works of art, digital works of art, whatever it is. Most of their alleyways are filled with graffiti and just artists expressing what they want. And I felt like it had more of a human touch to it than Sydney City does. Also, the fact that Melbourne City is, again, this is my impression, I could be wrong, but I felt it was more alive socially at night than Sydney City is. And that kind of also strengthens its resolve, or like its image, being that it's not Sydney, it's its own thing. Melbourne is its own thing, and it's not meant to be compared to Sydney. It's not meant to be compared against Sydney, because they're two separate things. And Melbourne, I feel like it's embraced the fact that it's more of a, I think, artistic place rather than Sydney. And I think that itself helps with kind of seeing the difference between both. Melbourne City also has public transportation, but it doesn't even come close to competing with Sydney's because, well, Sydney have the train, they have the metro, and then they have the railway in the middle. Meanwhile, Melbourne City, I think it does have a train line, but it's for outside of the city, and then they use a tram inside the city, which is kind of slower than the train or the metro that we're used to here in Sydney. So on that kind of perspective, it doesn't compare with Sydney City. But I think it's a matter of where you feel like you would go better. Like, I know a lot of people would probably listen to this and go like, okay, where do I see myself? Do I see myself in Sydney? Do I see myself in Melbourne? Well, the idea is just they're two different things. So compared on where you want to be in life and how you want to live your life, you can choose. You want a quieter life, you want somewhere. Also, one of the things that Melbourne is kind of nice, or one of the kind of nice things about Melbourne, is that the fact that it's not as developed as Sydney is. So you don't need to drive that far away from the city to start seeing a lot more land and a lot less houses. And that's not the case with Sydney. So, like for example, my cousin's house is maybe 20 minutes away from the city, and you feel like it's quiet, it's calm, it's got a nice street to it with a lot of stores and everything, but you feel like it's not as intense as if I were to drive 20 minutes away from the city here, because then I feel like we're still kind of compact, lots of houses and lots of living spaces and not enough open green spaces. And that's the difference, or that's kind of one of the differences between Sydney and Melbourne. And for me, like, to be honest, I loved it. I love Melbourne. I love the way they live their life there. It just doesn't align with how I want to progress with my life currently. But do I see the joys of Melbourne? Yeah, it's beautiful, and I love the fact that it's not trying to be like Sydney, but it's trying to be its own thing. And I think it's succeeded in doing that. But also, one of the things that I've noticed about Melbourne City that I don't really notice about Sydney City is that it shows a lot of traces of human activity or human presence. And let me explain that. So مثلا كنت ماشي على الطريق وبتلاقي حد كافيه على الطريق العام بالسيتي في طاولة عليها checkers board and 2 chairs. And I'm thinking that's only there because some person started playing here one day, and then it grew into a custom, and it started being every day that these guys are playing backgammon or whatever it is that they're playing there, until it became a certainty with the store. So he's opening up his cafe in the morning and automatically bringing that table out, putting it on the sidewalk, and just inviting people to sit down and play that game, and showing that there was human activity there. And there's other instances or examples of something similar to this that happen all around the city of Sydney, Melbourne, sorry. And you rarely see that in Sydney. So there's kind of the difference, or one of the pros that play in Melbourne's favor, is the fact that it can kind of provide this more humane aspect to it, which Sydney doesn't, or doesn't do as well. But you can't, like I was saying earlier, you can't go like, oh, I love Sydney, I fucking hate Melbourne, or oh, I hate Melbourne and I fucking love Sydney. Oh, sorry, I think I just said the same thing. Love Melbourne and hate Sydney. They're two different things, and each one is unique for its own thing. Like, for example, also one of the things that Melbourne, they have a lot of stand-up comedy shows, and they emphasize a lot of stand-up. Like when I was there was a lot of posters for shows, for concerts, for live gigs, stuff like that, where here in Sydney you don't see that kind of artistic representation. There we go. The word artistic is very key here today. And I think it is because I felt like Melbourne was a bit more artistic than Sydney was, or Sydney is, to be honest. But it's it's the fact that you're walking down the street and there's these things that are eye catching, like a poster for a show where you go like, that might be nice, I might go check that out, or this that's there. Meanwhile, here in Sydney City, because you're moving so fast and between the crowds, and because it's a lot of commercial spaces, you don't see that artistic advertisement. You don't see like random posters stuck on a wall somewhere saying that there's a gig here, or there's a concert here, or there's a stand-up comedian doing this there. So I felt like it was refreshing to see somewhere that not only emphasizes but also provides for artists of all mediums, whether it's stand-up comedy or theater or music or even drawing or sketching. And that for me is something quite nice, because I think it fits well with the image that Melbourne's trying to give in, where it's less about the work life and it's more about the life. And what I mean by life, I mean like, as in like, it's more about you enjoying your day as a human being and being able to kind of take in every second, because you move slower, you get to appreciate your lunch, you get to appreciate walking to work, whatever it is, and it doesn't feel like it's going into a blur. Again, one of the points that I've said before and I constantly keep saying is that I didn't work in Melbourne, I haven't lived there, so I don't know what it's like when you get to work there, because then it might change. It might be the same as Sydney. But this is what I got as an impression from visiting that city. And yeah, I think it's quite important seeing those things and realizing that there's someone there's a city that's trying to do something that's not the same as Sydney, but kind of its own thing. And yeah, that's very important, to be honest, and it helps quite a bit as well. Now, like I said, it's I haven't like I was saying a point. Oh yeah, the nightlife, their social life, I think it's a bit better. Now, I've talked about the social life here in Sydney, and I've gotten a couple of times someone saying like, oh no, you need to experience it like this, and you change your mind. And I'm open to all experiences, obviously, and to having my mind changed. That's the reason why I'm doing this podcast, basically, is for me not only to express what I'm thinking about, but also to get you guys' opinion, and also to get other people to come and say what they think about whatever topic that we're talking about. So I could be wrong about both Sydney and Melbourne, but I think I would recommend to anyone living in Sydney to go visit Melbourne, because it's quite a nice place. But also just to take any opportunity you can to visit another place, because sometimes you get stuck in your own world, be it Sydney, be it Lebanon, be it Paris, wherever it is, and you're stuck in this city and you feel like this is how life is or how life is going to be. And only when you visit somewhere else do you realize that there is kind of another way of living, or there is a kind of another way to experience your day to day, and it might help you realign. So like, I think my trip to Melbourne helped me understand a bit more what I want my life to look like. So you start to go, is this a situation where I can bring this item that I want in my life to Sydney, or is it a situation where I'm gonna have to go looking for that? And traveling is the way to experience that and to understand this. So just any opportunity you get to hop on a plane, hop on a car, hop on a boat, wherever it is, and go see a different part of the world, do it. Keep in mind, our great grandfathers, even my grandfather, I don't think my grandfather's ever been on a plane. Allah yarham. Um, but you start to see that this kind of thing that we take for granted, this ability to just hop on a plane and go somewhere, is not something old. It's new, and it's something that, if you can, take advantage of it. Get to see more parts of the world, because the more parts of the world you see, the more people you understand. So, like for example, last year I went to Vietnam, I got to experience the people there, and now I have a appreciation for the people of Vietnam specifically because of that experience. And so it changes your impression of those people, those countries, and it makes you realize, one of the things that it made me realize is that we as a people on this earth, we all share a lot of things in common and a lot of values that are in common. But the only way to understand that is by genuinely sitting with someone from that country and getting to talk to them, getting to interact with them, and start to realize that you sound exactly like one of my friends back home. Like, they talk this way, they express themselves this way, and you start going like, wow, it's different. It's nice. And I think, like I was saying, even if it's something as close as Melbourne, which is an hour and a half on a plane, nothing. Do it. Travel the world, because you get to do episodes on podcasts with me where we compare Sydney and Melbourne and what the difference is between this place and that. But I think, having had the trip last week, me talking about this was going to be fresh today. It's like off the head conversation, just talking about what I thought the difference was between here and there. And I think we're going through a nice phase of the podcast now. I want to try to bring more people along with me. And I'm still trying to figure out kind of what the identity of this podcast is. Is it going to be prepared, where we go through lectures, for example, like the one on Tripoli or the ones on Phoenician mythology? Or is it going to be just random episodes where I'm walking, talk about whatever pops on my mind? Or is it going to be interviewing other people? But I think it's going to be a mix of all three. But yes, and with that, I'd like to thank everyone for listening in, everyone for your support. And I guess this is it for today's episode. وما هيك بقلكن وهيك وشكرا.